A simple woman rejected at a hotel, the Invisibility Project. The night Catherine Morgan stepped into the Excelsior Hotel was not the beginning of a vendetta, but the final act of a larger, carefully orchestrated experiment. The limousine that awaited her in front of the Grand Hotel was not a symbol of opulence, but a vehicle for truth, a truth that would soon shatter a system built on invisible barriers. For Catherine, this was never about revenge. It was about exposing a fundamental flaw in how society measures worth based solely on outward appearance. Day 47 of Project Glass Ceiling. Catherine's voice remained calm and collected as she spoke in her digital recorder, her reflection catching in the lens of the tiny camera discreetly embedded into the brooch she wore. She wasn't a celebrity or someone accustomed to luxury. She wasn't even dressed in a way that could earn her a second glance in such a lavish environment. She wore a plain gray sweater and light-wash jeans, attire that made her blend into any crowd. An everyday woman, just another person among many. Yet, this wasn't a mere fashion choice. It was the uniform for her research. "This will be my 19th luxury establishment in Manhattan," Catherine spoke softly, almost to herself. The previous pattern holds consistent. 18 rejections based solely on appearance, despite my ability to pay. She adjusted her earrings subtly, state-of-the-art technology that allowed her to capture everything around her. Catherine wasn't just conducting a documentary. She was a creator of the Invisibility Project, a groundbreaking social experiment aimed at uncovering the unseen biases that ruled the hospitality industry. Tonight, she targeted the Excelsior Hotel, known for its legendary exclusivity, a bastion of institutionalized discrimination wrapped in luxury. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Her producer team is in position. Undercover cameras at the lobby entrance, bar, and reception area. Remember, we're not just documenting rejection. We're revealing the system. Catherine smiled, not with joy, but with a quiet, purposeful resolve. This was personal. Her mother had worked for 30 years in housekeeping at hotels just like this one. Invisible to the guests she served, her mother had cleaned their messes without ever being seen as part of the hotel's success. Tonight, Catherine was determined to make the invisible visible. Phase 1 initiating. At 7 p.m., Catherine stood outside the Excelsior, preparing to enter. The hotel's lobby was a blend of classic elegance, from the polished marble floors to the glittering chandeliers. The unmistakable scent of wealth lingered in the air, stronger than any perfume. As Catherine walked in, her simple clothes were an intentional contrast to the opulence surrounding her. She watched as the staff's attitudes shifted subtly, a stiffening of shoulders, a step back, their eyes darting to her appearance, calculating whether she belonged. These reactions were not by accident. They were the product of a system that categorized people based on how they appeared, not who they were. Approaching the reception desk, Catherine was greeted by a woman with precise features and a practiced smile. The name badge read Melissa Winters, front office manager. Catherine greeted her politely and slid her platinum credit card across the counter. "I'd like your finest available suite, please," she said, maintaining a calm demeanor. Melissa eyed Catherine's simple outfit, then looked at the card with a glance that felt more dismissive than polite. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked, her tone thin. "No, but I checked your website 20 minutes ago, and it says you have 3 suites available," Catherine replied evenly. Melissa's smile faltered. "I'm afraid our system is outdated. We're fully booked tonight." Catherine nodded, accepting the rejection as part of the pattern. But as she did, she observed something more troubling. Melissa muttered, just loud enough for Catherine to hear, "Looking shabby." Before Catherine could respond, a tall man in a custom suit approached the counter. His confident stride marked him as management. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his eyes barely glancing at Catherine. "We're fully booked, Mr. Reynolds," Melissa explained, looking at Catherine like she were the problem. Reynolds turned to Catherine, his tone dripping with condescension. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. The Excelsior maintains certain standards for our clientele. Catherine kept her calm. Are you refusing me service based on my appearance? Reynolds stiffened. We have a dress code policy, which you can review on our website. This is a matter of neat and appropriate attire. Catherine's voice carried as she asked, Are you suggesting my clothes are not clean or appropriate? She made sure her words were loud enough for nearby guests to hear. The conversation had drawn attention, as she had intended. Guests at the bar paused their conversations. Phones were raised in her direction. Reynolds' voice was cold. The interpretation of appropriate attire is at management's discretion. And in my professional assessment, your presentation doesn't meet the Excelsior standards. An unexpected voice interrupted. Excuse me, what's happening here? The voice belonged to an older gentleman in an impeccably tailored suit. His presence was commanding. He wasn't part of Catherine's plan, but his arrival was a welcome surprise. Sir, we're simply following protocol, Reynolds said, clearly trying to maintain control. I've stayed here for 20 years, the older man said, cutting him off. And I've never seen someone turn away for what they're wearing. Catherine stayed silent, letting the unexpected ally take the lead. The tension was palpable. Reynolds was visibly rattled. We're just maintaining the exclusive atmosphere our guests expect. The man, whose name was later revealed as Mr. Harrington, continued, I didn't know that appearance was now a prerequisite for acceptance. I'm afraid it's not, Catherine said, as she turned toward the door. Thank you for making your policy so transparent. The conversation had become a public display of the very biases Catherine had been documenting. She pressed a button on her brooch, signaling that Phase 1 was complete. The footage was secured, and the next step was ready. Phase 2, the revelation. Outside, she met with Marcus, who was waiting in an unmarked van across the street. They had what they needed, irrefutable proof of the systemic bias at the heart of luxury hospitality. The team was ready. The next night, Catherine would return to the Excelsior, but this time, she would not be a mere guest. She would not be dismissed. She was bringing the truth, and with it, a revolution that would change everything. The gala. The following evening, Catherine arrived at the Excelsior in the same gray sweater and light-washed jeans. The limousine was a sharp contrast to the casual nature of her attire, but that was the point. This time, she wasn't the invisible woman. She was visible, and her presence would demand attention. Inside the grand ballroom, where the annual Hospitality Excellence Awards were taking place, Catherine moved confidently. She wasn't a charity case or an outsider anymore. She was here to expose the truth, to show the world how the hospitality industry, which prided itself on excellence, really treated people based on how they appeared. As she walked into the reception, all eyes turned to her. The guests in tuxedos and gowns were confused. She didn't belong, they thought. But they were wrong. Ma'am, the public entrance is around the side, a security guard said, his voice polite but firm. Catherine handed him an invitation that had been personally addressed to her, and then something remarkable happened. Mr. Harrington, the man who had intervened the night before, appeared at her side. She's with me, he said. MS. Morgan is my guest tonight. Inside, Catherine was greeted with discomfort, but also with realization. She moved among the industry elites, introducing herself as the director of the Invisibility Project. She wasn't there to beg for a place at the table. She was there to pull the tablecloth away, to reveal the truth of what had been happening behind the scenes for so long. And then, the revelation began. The truth exposed. Screens across the ballroom flickered to life, showing footage from the previous night. Catherine being rejected, the dismissive comments, the treatment based solely on her appearance. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the footage played out. And then, Catherine stood before them, her voice steady, clear, and resolute. This is the reality behind hospitality excellence, she said. I was rejected here last night, but tonight I walk into the same hotel, in the same clothes, and everything changes. The difference is not in the clothes, but in the perception of power. Her words hit the crowd like a wave. This wasn't about individual biases. It was about a system that rewarded appearances and punished authenticity. 3 years ago, I began this project because my mother spent 30 years cleaning rooms in hotels like this one, invisible to the very people she served. The system didn't see her because she didn't fit the mold. But this evening, we changed that, Catherine continued, as more footage of similar rejections at other luxury establishments played on the screens behind her. The room was silent. Executives looked defensive. Some were embarrassed. A few were genuinely moved, their minds beginning to shift. Change is possible, Catherine concluded. But it takes commitment, not just one moment of revelation, but a continual effort to recognize the humanity in others, regardless of their appearance. The aftermath. 3 months later, Catherine sat in a sleek conference room, reviewing the outcomes of her work. Major hotel chains had implemented new policies that were a direct result of her invisibility project. No longer would the industry be allowed to operate with invisible barriers. Now, every guest would be treated with dignity, regardless of what they wore or how they looked. The changes were real. The Excelsior had undergone a transformation. Staff no longer judged people based on appearance. Even Melissa, the woman who had once dismissed Catherine, had become a strong advocate for change. And as Catherine looked out over the city, she smiled, not because of her success, but because of the transformation she had set in motion. The Excelsior's lights no longer symbolized exclusion. Now, they were a beacon of possibility. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. And truth, when given the space to be seen, could change the world.